the Shah of Iran. The United States seeks not friends, but servants. Simón Bolívar. The philosophy of open borders and maintaining friendships on all sides became complicated on at least one occasion, when the United States asked us to give refuge to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. Allowing the Shah to come to Panama was a goodwill gesture to the United States. It fulfilled no Panamanian business or strategic interest, and for the first time, it opened us to the possibility of terrorist attacks from the Middle East. In fact, our image suffered as a result, at least among student groups and nationalist parties, who chanted in favor of the man who overthrew the Shah, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The only advantage was in international prestige. We were helping the United States solve a problem, and we were receiving quite a bit of notoriety on the hit parade of fleeting fame. Everybody was talking about Panama, if only because of the Shah. The first overture for the Shah to come to Panama was early in 1979, shortly after his fall from power. The argument by some was a financial one. In return for asylum, the Shah could be expected to invest heavily in the country. In February, the Shah's son, Prince Reza, came to Panama City for a visit in which he could examine investment opportunities. In November, Bernardo Benes, a Cuban-born banker in Miami, contacted Ricardo de la Espriella, who was vice president under President Aristides Royo, and asked if the offer to visit Panama was still open. The Shah had arrived in New York from his asylum in Mexico on October 22, 1979, to receive medical treatment. On November 4th, Iranian students and militants seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, along with a number of hostages. The Carter administration was looking for a quick departure for the Shah and was considering Austria and South Africa. Was Panama still interested? De la Espriella said he believed it could still be done. On November 30th, Ambler Moss, the U.S. ambassador to Panama, was asked by the State Department to make an inquiry. By December 1st, he was able to tell Washington that General Torrijos would agree to give the Shah refuge if President Carter asked him to do so. The president's aide, Hamilton Jordan, was dispatched secretly to Panama and joined Ambassador Moss for a meeting with Torrijos. Torrijos went along with the idea and offered two possible hideaways, a mountain ranch in Chiriquí and a house owned by Gabriel Lewis, former Panamanian ambassador to the United States, on Contadora, the resort island just off the Panamanian mainland. I took an inspection team to review both locations, and the Shah's men chose Contadora. There were then negotiations with the Shah and with the Americans about security arrangements. The Shah wanted substantial security guarantees and communication with the outside world. The United States offered special electricity-generating equipment and long-distance telephone lines, which the Shah rejected, fearing his phones would be tapped. After super-secret preparations, the Shah was flown to Contadora on a Twin Otter aircraft on December 15, 1979. He took up residence in the chalet owned by Gabriel Lewis, who at the time owned the island. When news of the Shah's arrival became known, we faced student protests in Panama City and criticism around the world. Contadora had become an exotic destination with a newfound reputation. Its name was on the maps, but tourism declined 60%. Who wanted to face armed guards on the beach? The Shah's security forces in Panama were men who had been well-trained in Europe, the Middle East, and the United States, with both commando and intelligence experience in the field. At their highest count, there were more than 300 members in the force, most of them operating fixed control points on 4 shifts, once we set the Shah up at his quarters in Contadora. Several times there were attempts by terrorists to penetrate the security cordon and reach the Shah. At least one occasion involved a zealot on a suicide mission, trying to sneak into Panama with false documents. With the Ayatollah declaring that killing the Shah would be a sure route to heaven, we were certain that there would be such an effort, and our guard was always up. There were at least 6 cases in all, involving various plans to break through the security net. There were also several nighttime overflights with the goal of attacking the Shah as he slept. None was very professional, and none got very far. Our security followed the principle of conducting operations in a way that would never alarm the subject we were protecting. We deployed plainclothes operatives at key locations. We used wiretaps. We monitored airports and the coast, often employing agents who didn't seem to be intelligence officers, but instead tourists, gardeners, or common workmen who blended into their surroundings. The Iranian team was confused and intrigued by our subtle, almost invisible method of operation, since their approach was the classic man-to-man bodyguard protection. Where is this security that is handled so we can't even see it? The Iranians wanted to know. For that reason, at the outset, relations were strained between our Panamanian forces and the Iranian team. After a while, however, they recognized that our measures were intricate and worked, and they became accustomed to depending on our operation. They praised our security apparatus and started calling us magicians among security operatives. That was much in contrast with the Shah's decision to reject security measures from the Southern Command or any other U.S. federal agency. The Shah didn't trust the United States, fearing that their monitoring of his planning, contacts, and relations would be used against him. He told me that his relations with the Americans left a bad taste, a feeling of lack of sincerity, lack of friendship and help when he needed it most, during his exile in the United States, despite their historically unconditional support. Within the context of a man whose world had been broken apart, the Shah was personable and natural in the way he conducted himself, sad and inconsolable, yet calm and coming to terms with his life. I saw the Shah every day, mostly when his own security detail retired for the night. He would ask questions about Panama, a place he knew nothing at all about. He spoke often of what he had done for his country. He asked us what the latest news was from Iran and would sometimes turn on the shortwave radio we had given him to monitor news reports from Europe and the Middle East. I remember one time he heard on the Zenith shortwave that the Ayatollah Khomeini had executed a number of generals from the Shah's disbanded army. He cried when he told me about this. He spoke in a low voice with a dark, far-off look in his eye. He was never at all effusive, nor did I ever see him smile. He slept in an upstairs bedroom in the chalet, and his valet and bodyguards slept on the floor at the entrance to his bedroom. His wife, Queen Farah Diba, slept in a separate room downstairs. He had 2 Dalmatians, each the size of a newborn calf, but quite docile. It was evident that he was a man educated in another era, and was used to the trappings and privileges that went along with being the Shahanshah, son of sons, king of kings. He moved with an imperial air and was used to the finest foods and accommodations. He never touched money or carried any worldly possession. He liked to have a close-cropped haircut, so once a week we sent around the National Guard's barber, Sergeant Santiago Ardines, who would give him a trim. Farah Diba also had special visits from a hairstylist. My wife, Felicidad, introduced her to the stylist Giovanni, who would also come around frequently. Farah Diba was cordial to my wife, giving her own gold cigarette case as a birthday present, emblazoned with the royal crown. The couple's sons would visit now and then. One of them, Cyrus, went on a tour of the canal locks on one occasion, traveling to the countryside. The captain of the plane he flew in gave him the controls during the flight. Cyrus had flown ever since his father had given him a plane for his 15th birthday. I recall that he was given honorary Panamanian Air Force wings when he landed. Farah Diba loved to chat on the telephone long into the night. She also played quite a bit of tennis, took long walks, and went water skiing. One day there was a ruckus among the security guards, the scuba diving team to be exact, because they spotted her water skiing in the Pacific. The divers got as close as they could and enjoyed the view. She was a very attractive woman. If anything could be said about the Shah, it was that he was a wanted man. Killing or capturing the Shah would have been a trophy for the Iranian government and its supporters. Meanwhile, the Ayatollah's revolutionary government did everything possible in diplomatic and legal terms to have him return to Iran. In retrospect, it's clear that General Torrijos never would have handed him over to the Ayatollah. He did allow speculation on the matter and participated in formal meetings with lawyers, hearing arguments and such. This was designed to avoid any violence of the kind that the Americans had faced once they protected the Shah. Torrijos told me that the only way anyone would ever capture the Shah was on his way out of Panama, heading somewhere else. When the time finally came for the Shah to leave Panama, it was on the insistence of his twin sister. The Shah was in the middle of a complicated political argument about his medical condition. His doctors, including the American heart surgeon Dr. Michael DeBakey, mostly agreed that his spleen was cancerous and needed to be removed. The argument was over where to do the surgery. The Americans rejected surgery back in the United States, fearing further protests if the Shah returned to U.S. territory. The second option was to conduct a surgery in a Panamanian hospital, but the Shah's family and advisors would not hear of it, even though the Shah was hospitalized for a time at Patia Hospital, one of the best in the country. There was also a suggestion that the surgery could be done at Gorgas Hospital, a U.S. medical institution in the former Canal Zone. Panamanian physicians, led by a military doctor, Carlos Garcia, opposed this option, partly because it would violate Panamanian medical procedures, but mostly because Garcia disagreed with the diagnosis of the Americans that an operation was required, or that the Shah could even survive such an operation. Behind it all was the inference that it would be convenient for the Americans if the Shah died on an operating table in Panama. The Shah's twin sister settled matters. After long talks with Jahan Sadat, the wife of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, the offer was made for the Shah to go to Egypt. This came despite strong protests from Washington. The Shah's sister was a domineering figure who wanted nothing to do with any of us. No one liked her, least of all the security team around the Shah. Her influence was such, and she argued so much, that her brother finally gave in and agreed to move to Egypt. Once she had convinced him, she left with 20 trunks of clothing and other personal effects. I was in Chiriquí on March 24, 1980, the day of his departure, which came so suddenly that I didn't know exactly when it was happening. There, on the border, I received a message that he had to speak to me urgently. On the flight down to Panama City, I learned that he was leaving. I arrived just as he prepared to board the plane that was to take him to Cairo. He was already on the steps of the plane when he saw me. He put his arms around me, something that was very much out of character for him, and said that he had been looking for me all day, and he was relieved to see me before his departure. If you had been here and had been told what was going on, I would have felt secure with your assurances and never would have given in to leaving, he said. As he spoke, his eyes seemed the saddest eyes I had ever seen, and he was close to tears. He was feverish as he shook my hand in a final farewell. One could see the shadow of death on his brow. The Shah's brief period of exile in Panama was a strangely emotional experience for all of us. We developed a certain affection for him, a sense of pity, perhaps. The experience, however, was mixed. Panama and the island of Contadora had become known worldwide, but the promise of a boon for investment hadn't panned out. The Shah invested nothing at all. We had won the respect of the world's intelligence services for our efficiency and expertise. Torrijos had demonstrated his faithfulness and honesty in the international political arena. If there was calculation in so doing, it simply was to show the Americans that he was willing to work with them. On the other hand, of course, the loss of prestige in the Third World and among Islamic countries was pronounced. But now that the canal treaties were a reality, Omar wanted to nurture his friendship with the Americans as a platform for regional leadership. He thought he had a role to play as an honest broker. But his plan was tragically cut short.